They told me my parents' 35th anniversary party was too private, leaving no room for me. A few hours later, my sister posted a photo of a packed banquet table captioned "Family Only." I replied with exactly one sentence. What they truly wanted to exclude from that picture was not my name on their massive debt, but my physical presence. I will not cry for a seat anymore. I will drag their entire table into the light. I am Elena James. I am 34 years old, living alone in a high-rise apartment in Nashville, Tennessee. By day, I am the contract director for Astor Ridge Planning, a corporate firm where every agreement, every liability, and every loophole is meticulously documented in black and white. I deal in certainties. If a party fails to deliver, there is a specific clause for that. If a foundation is rotten, the paperwork will inevitably reveal the cracks. I am very good at my job because I understand that words matter, but signatures matter more. My family, however, has always preferred to operate in the gray spaces where obligations are implied. Boundaries are intentionally blurred, and gratitude is permanently deferred. My parents, Diane and Martin James, were celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary. The venue was Willow Creek House, a sprawling suburban estate located just outside Franklin. We always referred to it as the ancestral property, a grand title for a place that looked like a Southern Gothic dream, but functioned as an endless financial sinkhole. It had the wrap-around porches, the ancient weeping willows, the distressed brick pathways, and the romantic charm that couples paid a premium for. It also had a leaking roof, outdated plumbing, and a commercial insurance premium that could easily choke a small business. But to my family, the visual image was the only thing that mattered. Maintaining that aesthetic was their true religion. The phone call from my mother came exactly 4 days before the event. Diane never calls just to chat or ask how my week is going. Her phone calls are carefully orchestrated performances, complete with dramatic pauses, tactical sighs of feigned exhaustion, and a practiced tone of martyrdom. When I answered, her voice carried that specific, sugary cadence she uses when she is about to deliver a heavy blow and expects me to swallow it with a polite smile. She explained that the guest list had gotten completely out of hand. Some of my father's old business partners had confirmed at the very last minute. A few distant relatives from out of state had suddenly decided to make the trip down. The seating arrangements in the main conservatory were simply impossible to manage. There was absolutely no room left. She told me she knew I was so incredibly busy with my contracts and my stressful city life, and she figured I would understand if we just kept this particular dinner strictly to the essential guests. She actually used the word essential, letting it hang in the quiet air between us like a final verdict. I sat at my kitchen island, listening to the low hum of my refrigerator. I forced my voice to remain perfectly level. I told her it was completely fine. I lied and said I had a mountain of vendor proposals to review that weekend anyway, and that driving out to Franklin would have been a massive hassle. I tried to convince myself that I was relieved to avoid the formal wear and the forced polite conversation, but the terrifying smoothness of her tone betrayed the truth. There was no hesitation, no genuine apology, no awkwardness of a mother forced to make a tough call. This was not a logistical error. This was a deliberate excision. She had practiced that speech in front of a mirror. That Saturday evening, the night of the anniversary party, the silence in my apartment felt heavy and suffocating. To keep myself from spiraling into the pathetic territory of self-pity, I started cleaning. I scrubbed the grout in my bathroom until my knuckles ached and the smell of harsh chemicals burned my nose. I reorganized my pantry, aligning the labels with the manic precision of a woman trying to control the only environment she was actually allowed to exist in. I wanted to scrub away the lingering sensation of being unwanted. I wanted to sanitize the familiar, hollow ache of being pushed to the periphery of my own bloodline. Around 9 o'clock, physically exhausted and smelling of bleach, I sat down on my living room sofa and made the mistake of picking up my phone. I unlocked the screen and opened my social media feed. At the very top, glowing brightly against the dark screen, was a new post from my younger sister, Brooke James. Brooke is the golden child. She is chaotic, emotionally volatile, and consistently broke. But she possesses a magnetic, helpless charm that makes people eager to clean up her messes. If I am the unseen foundation of the family, bearing the heavy weight in the dark, Brooke is the stained glass window everyone stops to admire in the light. I stared at the photograph on my screen. It was not a candid shot taken in a moment of spontaneous joy. It was professionally lit, perfectly framed, and entirely damning. The image captured a long, rustic banquet table set beneath a breathtaking canopy of fairy lights. Crystal glasses caught the warm glow of dozens of golden taper candles. The guests were all dressed in an orchestrated palette of cream and white, looking like a glossy spread from a luxury lifestyle magazine. There was my mother, looking radiant and victorious, raising a tall glass of champagne. There was my father, smiling his passive, agreeable smile, perfectly happy to be carried along by the current of his wife's ambitions. And there was Brooke, positioned front and center, laughing beautifully, leaning into the frame. But it was the rest of the table that made my breath catch in my throat. I saw aunts and uncles I had not spoken to in years. I saw my parents' neighbors, a couple who used to constantly complain about the noise from the venue's weekend events. I even saw a couple sitting near the center, whom I had never seen before in my entire life. Likely prospective investors or minor local socialites my mother wanted to impress. Every chair was occupied, except for two empty ones visibly pushed back at the far end of the long table. I zoomed in on the image. I looked at the generous spacing between the heavy oak chairs. I looked at the elaborate floral arrangements cascading down the center runner. The excuse of limited seating dissolved into a mocking, undeniable lie. There was plenty of room. There was room for neighbors. There was room for absolute strangers. There simply was no room for me. Then I read Brooke's caption. Family only, finally all of us together. The words did not induce tears. They did not make me want to scream, call my mother, or throw my phone against the wall. Instead, a profound, freezing clarity washed over me. The dull, persistent pain of childhood rejection crystallized into something incredibly sharp, precise, and entirely devoid of sentimentality. For years, I had been the invisible safety net. When the venue's roof needed emergency patching after a brutal spring storm, it was my credit card that absorbed the blow. When the event management software subscriptions lapsed and threatened to delete a year of bookings, it was my bank account that brought the system back online. I was not a daughter. I was a utility. I was the silent partner who funded the illusion of their perfect Southern aristocracy. They had gathered under the lights my credit line had purchased, drinking expensive champagne out of glasses my deposits had secured, sitting at a table I had practically rented for them. They wanted the benefits of my labor without the burden of my presence. They wanted the financial shelter I provided, but they absolutely did not want my face ruining their curated aesthetic. I did not type a lengthy paragraph detailing my hurt. I did not demand an explanation or ask how they could be so blatantly cruel. In my line of work, the most devastating actions are taken with minimal words. A contract termination does not require emotion or a dramatic monologue. It merely requires formal documented notice. I tapped the comment box beneath Brooke's flawless photograph. My fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, completely devoid of any trembling. Looks beautiful. From now on, the line of credit, equipment rentals, and venue insurance are all yours too. I hit send. I watched the comment appear right below her poetic caption. It sat there, a cold, undeniable truth slicing straight through the fantasy of the cream and white gathering. I closed the application, set the phone down on the coffee table, and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of ice water. I felt surprisingly light. The heavy, suffocating burden of trying to earn my place at their table had vanished into thin air. I was no longer striving for an invitation to a house I was secretly keeping afloat. It took exactly 10 minutes for the fallout to begin. When I walked back into the living room, the photograph was gone. The entire post had been frantically deleted from the platform, but my phone was no longer silent. The screen was flashing continuously, vibrating against the glass tabletop with frantic urgency. First, it was Brooke calling. Then, my mother. Then Brooke again. The missed calls piled up rapidly, a digital manifestation of their sudden, terrifying realization that the invisible bank holding their lives together had just closed its doors. For 34 years, I had answered every single call. I had solved every crisis they created. I had played the reliable, uncomplaining role assigned to me since childhood. But as I watched the screen light up repeatedly with their names, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no sorrow, no urge to fix it. The girl who would have cried over being excluded from the anniversary dinner was dead. The woman standing in the apartment was the contract director, and she had just issued her notice of termination. I did not pick up the phone. I let it ring. Let them panic in their cream and white outfits. Let them look around the grand estate they were so intensely proud of and realize that the foundation they were standing on was about to be pulled right out from under them. If you look closely at any childhood photo album stored in the dusty attic of my parents' house, you will notice an undeniable, recurring theme. Brooke is always stationed squarely in the center of the frame. She was a child who absolutely demanded to be seen at all times. She was loud, fiercely beautiful, and possessed a chaotic, spinning energy that my mother found endlessly charming. When Brooke left her toys scattered wildly across the expensive hardwood floors, it was framed as a sign of a vibrant, creative mind at work. When she completely forgot her chores, leaving dirty dishes to crust over in the sink, it was because she was simply too spirited to be contained by mundane, earthly routines. Brooke had a miraculous, almost terrifying ability to make people soften toward her. She instinctively weaponized her own fragility, turning genuine carelessness into something my parents proudly labeled as artistry. I was the exact, calculated opposite. I learned very early on that the best way to survive in a house that was constantly vibrating with the high frequency of my sister's daily drama was to remain completely invisible and entirely flawless. I was the straight-A student who never needed tutoring. I was always meticulously punctual, standing by the front door with my backpack zipped 10 minutes before we needed to leave. I took my responsibilities seriously, memorizing my homework schedules and scrubbing my own bathroom without ever having to be reminded. But instead of earning me any measurable praise or affection, my quiet competence quickly mutated into a rigid baseline expectation, because I never threw tantrums to demand attention. My parents simply stopped providing it. My dedicated efforts were not celebrated. They were merely processed as the natural, unchangeable order of things, a basic obligation I owed them in exchange for being the easy, unproblematic child. The sheer contrast between how we were valued crystallized perfectly during my late 20s. Brooke had enthusiastically enrolled in a highly competitive Master of Fine Arts program, a terribly expensive, out-of-state endeavor funded entirely by my parents' dwindling savings. She lasted exactly one semester before dramatically dropping out. She claimed the rigid academic environment was aggressively stifling her creative soul and causing her severe, debilitating stress. When she came home, dragging heavy leather suitcases full of unworn expensive clothes and blank canvases, my mother wrapped her in a fierce, protective embrace at the front door. Diane treated her exactly like a wounded, heroic soldier returning from a brutal war, soothing her theatrical tears and immediately spending hours preparing her favorite roasted chicken dinner to ease her transition back to civilian life. Exactly 1 month later, I received my first career-defining promotion at the corporate firm. I had worked grueling 80-hour weeks for 2 solid years, sacrificing weekends and personal relationships to secure that title. I drove out to Willow Creek that following weekend, carrying a very expensive bottle of imported wine, foolishly hoping to receive even a tiny fraction of the warmth Brooke had been showered with. I found my mother in the bright, sunlit kitchen, meticulously arranging towering floral centerpieces for an upcoming spring wedding. When I stood there and proudly told her the news of my promotion, she did not even pause in cutting the thick green stems. She gave a brief, distracted nod, muttered that it sounded nice, and then immediately pivoted the entire conversation. Without taking a breath, she asked me exactly when I was going to have time to drive back out and inspect the rotting wood on the roof of the venue's storage shed. complaining bitterly that the local contractor was quoting them entirely too much money. My monumental achievement was completely irrelevant to her. My ongoing utility to the property was the only thing that actually mattered. That specific utility became the very lifeblood of Willow Creek House just a few years later. The world shut down, the economy froze, and the bustling event industry collapsed overnight. Then, as if the universe possessed a deeply cruel sense of humor, an unusually severe storm season ripped through the southern states. The venue took a massive, punishing physical hit. Suddenly, the pristine, aristocratic facade my parents had so desperately and expensively maintained began to physically crumble in the heavy rain. They were hemorrhaging cash at an alarming rate. They were severely short on money for emergency roof repairs, panicked over the exorbitant commercial insurance premiums that had just doubled, unable to cover the mandatory deposits for their most reliable catering vendors, and completely failing to pay the licensing fees for the digital event management software that kept their booking calendar from disintegrating. They were drowning in deep water, and their immense pride absolutely refused to let them admit it to anyone in their polished social circle. So, they naturally looked to the one person in their life who had never learned how to say no. It started incredibly small, disguised as minor, temporary favors. A quick wire transfer of $2,000 to cover an overdue landscaping bill, so the expansive front grounds would not look abandoned to prospective brides. Another $500 a few weeks later to keep the crucial software company from locking them out of their own client database. I stepped in and paid these without hesitation, because I deeply believe that is exactly what families are supposed to do during an unprecedented crisis. I genuinely believed I was throwing them a temporary lifeline to keep their heads above water, but a lifeline implies a short, frantic rescue followed by solid ground. What I ended up providing was permanent, unending life support. The short-term emergency transfers quietly and maliciously evolved into a regular, heavy monthly hemorrhage of my own hard-earned savings. I was silently paying the unglamorous, entirely invisible bills that kept the crystal chandeliers shining and the heavy oak doors open. I was single-handedly keeping the sacred family business from collapsing into total, humiliating bankruptcy. Yet, despite everything, no one in that house ever looked me directly in the eye and acknowledged the massive magnitude of what I was doing for them. My mother possessed a terrifying, almost sociopathic talent for rebranding harsh reality. She never once called it a bailout. She casually, breezily referred to my constant flow of money as me simply helping the family through a little tough patch. Brooke, who was still living rent-free in the renovated guest cottage on the back of the property, was even more grandiose and delusional. She regularly called my financial bleeding an important investment in our shared legacy. They expertly wrapped my silent sacrifices in noble, familial terms to actively avoid facing the uncomfortable, transactional truth. Not a single time did they ever offer me a formal repayment agreement, a legal share of equity in the property, or even a simple, genuine expression of gratitude. I was bleeding out to pay for a grand legacy that I was explicitly not allowed to claim. I tried, on several exhausting occasions, to gently bring up the staggering amount of money I had poured into the soil of that estate. I would deliberately look to my father for some kind of intervention or defense. Martin was a quiet, deeply conflict-averse man who spent most of his adult life hiding in his dusty private study or walking the far perimeter of the estate, just to avoid interacting with his wife. He was not an actively malicious man, but his chronic cowardice was its own specific, heavy form of cruelty. Whenever I carefully mentioned the crushing financial strain I was under, he would slowly look down at his worn leather boots, awkwardly shuffle his feet on the rug, and deliver the exact same cowardly line he had used as a shield my entire life. He would sigh heavily and say, "You know exactly how your mother is, Elena. Just give it some time to blow over." That single, pathetic phrase was his universal pardon for every terrible thing Diane ever did. It conveniently placed the heavy burden of tolerance entirely onto my shoulders. I was fully expected to absorb the devastating financial and emotional cost simply because I was deemed the strong one. Over time, the agonizing, freezing truth finally settled deep into my bones. I finally, truly understood my actual, permanent role in their family ecosystem. I was not a cherished daughter worthy of unconditional love. I was simply the designated consequence handler. When Brooke carelessly broke things, I was dispatched to fix them. When my parents foolishly overspent on luxury table linens for a bridal show instead of paying the massive commercial electricity bill, I quietly covered the embarrassing difference. As I moved deeper into my independent life in the city, I realized with absolute clarity that I had ceased to exist as a human being in their eyes. I was no longer a woman with her own stressful career, personal fears, or private desires. I materialized in their perfectly curated lives only as a perfectly timed wire transfer, a silent, automated direct deposit that flawlessly ensured their beautiful fantasy never shattered. I had spent my entire adult life desperately trying to buy my way into their hearts by being endlessly useful. I stupidly thought that if I saved the house, they would finally have to look at me and see my worth. I thought they would gladly pull a heavy wooden chair out for me at the head of their grand table and tell me I finally belonged there. But I learned the hardest way possible that utility does not ever inspire love. It only breeds deep, unshakable entitlement. They did not love me for saving them from ruin. They actively resented me for being the one who had the power to do it. And they punished me for that power by making sure I stayed completely out of sight. That is exactly why the photograph from the anniversary dinner did not break me. The true shock had already happened. It had simply bled out slowly, drop by drop, over a long decade of ignored birthdays, totally dismissed achievements, and silent, desperate bank transfers. Seeing that bright image on my phone screen, seeing the smiling strangers occupying the very space that my own money had secured, was not a sudden, tearing betrayal. It was simply the very first time the quiet, unspoken, brutal reality of my daily life was proudly published for the entire world to see. They had finally taken the ugly truth of how they viewed me, dressed it up in expensive cream and white linen, illuminated it with beautiful twinkling fairy lights, and applied a perfect, softening digital filter. They had always fought to keep me lingering just outside the edge of the frame. Now, looking at that picture, I was perfectly, coldly fine with walking away from their gallery entirely. Exactly 1 week before the anniversary, the subtle machinery of my exclusion shifted into a higher gear. It began with a lengthy voicemail from my mother, left during my morning commute while I was stuck in heavy city traffic. Her tone was dripping with that artificial, suffocating sweetness she exclusively reserves for delivering bad news while preemptively painting herself as the victim of unfortunate circumstances. She cheerfully noted that they were keeping the celebration incredibly intimate this year. She spent 2 full minutes detailing the absolute nightmare of arranging the tables, emphasizing how drastically limited the physical space had become due to the caterer's unexpected layout requirements. I had not even called her back to digest this information or offer a polite concession when, exactly 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated loudly against the cup holder in my car. It was a short text message from Brooke. "Do not make a big deal out of this. Mom is incredibly stressed out right now and her blood pressure is high. Just let them have their night." I did not argue. I did not send a long, emotional reply demanding my rightful place at the table or reminding them of everything I had sacrificed. Instead, I retreated into the one pathetic coping mechanism I had relied on my entire adult life. I tried to buy my way back into their graces through undeniable, overwhelming thoughtfulness. I had spent 6 weeks secretly working with a boutique archivist located in downtown Nashville to meticulously restore my parents' original wedding photographs. I had paid a premium to have water damage removed and faded colors revived. I had them carefully printed on thick archival paper and bound in a stunning, custom-tooled leather album that smelled of expensive wax and careful craftsmanship. It was a deeply personal gift, completely devoid of any practical utility. A small, desperate part of my brain still foolishly believed that if I presented them with something physically beautiful, something that mirrored their desperate obsession with perfect aesthetics, they would be forced to pause. I thought they would hold the heavy book in their hands, recognize the immense love required to create it, and finally see me. I paid for overnight expedited shipping on a Tuesday to ensure it arrived well before the weekend chaos began. Exactly 2 days after I received the delivery confirmation email, the heavy rectangular package was unceremoniously dropped off at my apartment building by a local courier. The brown shipping tape had not even been cut. Slipped beneath the thick, dark green silk ribbon I had carefully chosen for the wrapping was a small, cream-colored piece of heavy cardstock. The looping, elegant handwriting belonged undeniably to my mother. The note did not offer any thanks. It did not acknowledge the effort, the expense, or the sentiment. It simply read, "We have already finalized the decor for the display tables. No room for extras." That was it. My meticulously planned, emotionally laden offering was treated exactly like an unsolicited vendor sample that clashed with their carefully chosen color palette. They did not even care enough to break the seal and look inside at their own youthful faces. The next afternoon, I was sitting in my glass-walled office at Astor Ridge Planning, staring completely blankly at a complex, 70-page vendor agreement, when Tessa Rowe walked in. Tessa is my closest colleague, a sharp, fiercely observant senior analyst who possesses a terrifying ability to read the unspoken dynamics of any room she enters. She took one look at my pale, defeated expression, quietly closed the heavy glass door behind her, and sat down in the leather chair across from my desk. I explained the situation with the returned leather album, trying desperately to keep my voice light and strictly professional, masking the deep, hot humiliation burning in my chest. I tried to laugh it off as just another quirky family misunderstanding. Tessa did not smile. She did not offer any soft, comforting platitudes about how families are just complicated. She leaned forward, rested her elbows on my desk, and delivered the exact, brutal truth I had been violently avoiding for over a decade. She looked me dead in the eye and told me to stop trying to force them to love the human being sitting in front of her. She said, "They only love the version of you that keeps the lights on and the water running. Elena. Anything else just gets in their way and ruins their lighting." That evening, the heavy, suffocating silence of my apartment pressed in on me from all sides. I opened my laptop and logged securely into my personal banking dashboard. For the first time in many long months, I did not just quickly glance at the total balance to ensure I was safe. I sat down at my kitchen island and forced myself to meticulously trace every single outgoing transaction from the past 90 days. I stared intently at the recurring payments I had set up on autopay, the silent, relentless monthly bleeding that I had practically become numb to over the years. There was the hefty subscription fee for the premium venue booking platform, the very software that allowed them to schedule their exclusive events and collect massive deposits without lifting a finger. There was the expensive, ironclad monthly lease agreement for the commercial cooling equipment securely stored behind the main hall, ensuring their expensive wedding cakes never melted in the humid southern heat. There was the secondary property insurance premium, a massive, comprehensive policy I had personally secured to protect the estate after the terrible storm damage, simply because their primary insurance carrier had threatened to drop them entirely due to unpaid previous premiums. My right index finger hovered delicately over the trackpad. It would take less than 5 minutes to click into each individual merchant portal, locate the billing settings, and completely sever the automatic payments. I could cut the financial umbilical cord right then and there, leaving them to navigate the impending due dates on their own. But I hesitated. The deeply ingrained, toxic habits of a lifelong people-pleaser do not simply evaporate over the course of a single, painful week. Canceling the payments right before their massive, highly publicized celebration felt deeply vindictive. It felt like active, malicious sabotage. I told myself that pulling the plug right now would officially make me the villain in their heavily curated narrative. I would be the bitter, jealous daughter trying to ruin her parents' magical milestone. But simultaneously, as I stared at the bright white screen, a dark, sickening realization washed over me. If I kept paying these bills, I was literally funding the exact machinery that was being actively used to exclude me. I was paying for the stage, the ambient lighting, and the security, only to be intentionally locked out of the theater by the very actors I was supporting. I was underwriting my own emotional exile. I ultimately closed the laptop that night without canceling a single payment. The hesitation was born of a lingering, pathetic hope that maybe things were not quite as calculated as they seemed. But the returned, unopened leather album still sat heavily on my dining table, a physical, undeniable monument to their profound indifference. Since that package had arrived back at my door, a much darker, more insidious suspicion had begun to take firm root in the back of my mind. It felt vastly different from the usual, familiar sting of being overlooked or taken for granted. This specific rejection felt cold. It felt calculated. The strange, highly coordinated way my mother and sister were managing my absence felt entirely too smooth to be a mere oversight regarding seating arrangements. Perhaps they did not just want me absent from the dinner table to save space. Perhaps they were actively orchestrating a complex situation where I was completely removed from all the operational and visual decisions regarding the property, while still securely anchored to the heavy financial liabilities. This slow-burning paranoia simmered fiercely beneath the surface for the remainder of the week. It gnawed at the edges of my focus while I drafted corporate contracts and reviewed standard compliance clauses at work. It was the exact reason I was frantically stress-cleaning my apartment on the night of their anniversary, aggressively trying to scrub away the lingering feeling of being a discarded, useless asset. And then, the photograph appeared on my phone screen. When I saw the glowing, smiling faces of complete strangers sitting comfortably in the expensive chairs I had implicitly paid for, when I read Brooke's arrogant, victorious caption about family only, every single ounce of my lifelong hesitation instantly evaporated. The returned gift, the sickly sweet voicemail, the warning text from my sister, and the active recurring payments all violently snapped together into one horrifyingly clear, undeniable picture. My hesitation, my guilt, and my desire to be the good daughter instantly transformed into something hard, cold, and entirely unforgiving. The girl who was afraid of ruining the party was gone, replaced entirely by a woman ready to dismantle the venue. Sunday morning arrived with the sterile, quiet brightness of a city waking up. I did not sleep much, but I was not tired. My mind was operating with the terrifying, frictionless speed that only comes when a long-held illusion finally shatters. At exactly 7 a.m, I sat down at my kitchen island, opened my laptop, and navigated straight to my banking portal. I did not hesitate this time. I clicked into the recurring payments dashboard. I located the property insurance premium, the scheduling software subscription, and the commercial cooling equipment lease. One by one, I hit the cancellation buttons. I watched the status tags change from active to terminated. It was a silent, administrative execution. I closed the laptop, made a cup of black coffee, and waited. It took exactly 45 minutes for the illusion of their perfect weekend to crack. My phone vibrated on the marble counter. It was a text message from my mother. Her tone had completely abandoned the sugary, dismissive cadence from the day before. It was frantic, clipped, and demanding. She asked why the central payment processing system was suddenly declining transactions. She complained that the regional equipment vendor had just called the venue office, threatening to send a truck to repossess the outdoor heaters before the Sunday brunch event could even begin. She demanded I call her back immediately to fix whatever banking glitch I had carelessly caused. I stared at the message, watching the little typing bubble appear and disappear as she frantically drafted follow-up demands. I felt a cold, hard knot of satisfaction forming in my chest. I set the phone down. I was not going to fix the glitch. I was going to let them drown in it. I was just turning toward the sink to wash my mug when a new notification chimed from my laptop. It was not a text. It was an email. The sender name was Granite Peak Capital. I frowned, my professional instincts immediately taking over. I did not have any accounts with a firm by that name. I assumed it was generic corporate spam, but the subject line contained my full legal name and the exact address of Willow Creek House. I opened the message. The text was formatted in the sleek, impersonal style of institutional finance. It began by thanking me for my continued partnership. Then, the second paragraph delivered a blow so severe it physically knocked the breath out of my lungs. The email was a formal courtesy notice, confirming the successful disbursement of the latest funding tranche and thanking me for my role as the primary personal guarantor for the venue expansion portfolio. My hands suddenly went numb. I read the sentence 3 times, my eyes struggling to process the arrangement of the words. Primary personal guarantor. I had never signed a single document authorizing a new loan for my parents' business. I had only ever paid existing operational bills directly from my own checking account. A guarantee meant I was legally on the hook for a principal amount I knew absolutely nothing about. The emotional bruising of being excluded from the family photograph vanished instantly, replaced by a pure, icy wave of adrenaline. This was no longer a family dispute about hurt feelings or lack of appreciation. This was a massive, tangible threat to my entire independent existence. I grabbed my phone, ignoring 3 new missed calls from Brooke, and dialed the toll-free customer service number listed at the bottom of the email. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I navigated the endless automated menu system. After nearly 10 minutes of holding, a cheerful account manager named David answered the line. I forced my voice into the calm, authoritative register I used during hostile contract negotiations. I provided my name and the venue address, explaining that I was conducting a routine personal audit and needed to verify the exact status of the accounts associated with my profile. I had to walk a very delicate line. If I sounded too panicked or immediately screamed fraud, they would freeze the file, lock me out of the information portal, and hand it over to their internal investigation unit before I could figure out the scope of the damage. I needed data first. David enthusiastically complied. He congratulated me on the ambitious renovations at the estate, noting that the property value must have skyrocketed. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white, asking him to simply list the active liabilities under my name. As he read the file aloud, the floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. This was not a single, desperate emergency loan. It was a highly structured, comprehensive financial web. First, there was a massive term loan for structural and aesthetic upgrades, signed exactly 2 months ago. That timeline perfectly aligned with the moment my mother had casually mentioned that Willow Creek was undergoing a brand repositioning to attract a higher tier of luxury clientele. Second, there was a brutal, 5-year commercial lease for high-end event equipment. Finally, there was a revolving line of credit securely tied to the projected revenue of future wedding bookings. David cheerfully explained the terms. They were aggressive. If Willow Creek missed a single revenue target or delayed a monthly payment, Granite Peak Capital did not have to waste time suing the limited liability company, because my name was listed as the unconditional personal guarantor. The lender had the immediate, legal right to bypass the business entirely. They could garnish my corporate salary. They could place a heavy lien on my city apartment. They could drain my personal savings accounts to satisfy the debt. My family had effectively mortgaged my entire future to pay for their present luxury. I interrupted him, my voice dangerously quiet. I asked him how the documents were executed. I asked what specific verification methods were used to confirm my identity. He paused, clicking through his system. He stated that the entire package was processed digitally to expedite the funding. The file contained a clear, scanned color copy of my state-issued driver license. It also contained a comprehensive electronic signature that perfectly matched a verified signature sample I had provided during a minor, unrelated vendor dispute several years prior. I closed my eyes. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening violence. 4 years ago, during the worst of the storm damage crisis, the property insurance adjuster had demanded immediate proof of identity from all parties associated with the venue accounts. To speed up the agonizing process, I had scanned my license, my passport, and a signed authorization form, dropping the files into a shared family cloud storage folder. I had told them to use it for the insurance claim and then forgot about it. I never revoked their access. They still had the administrative passwords to that digital folder. Brooke and Diane had not just stumbled into this. They had deliberately navigated into that archived folder, extracted my personal identification documents, and utilized my old digital signature file to blindly bind me to hundreds of thousands of dollars in commercial debt. I ended the call with David, offering a tight, mechanical thank you. I set the phone down on the counter and stepped back. The kitchen was completely silent, but a deafening roar of realization rushed through my head. The beautiful anniversary dinner was not just an exclusive gathering of friends and investors. It was a victory lap. It was the grand, shining debut of a financial scheme built entirely on the stolen foundation of my name. Every single cream-colored napkin, every crystal glass, every blooming floral arrangement in that deleted photograph had been purchased with credit securely tied to my livelihood. They did not exclude me because the tables were too full. They excluded me because looking at my face across the candlelight would have been a physical reminder of the monumental theft they had just committed. They wanted to enjoy the spoils of the harvest without having to look at the draft horse that pulled the plow. For years, I had quietly absorbed their neglect. I had rationalized their selfishness. But fraud is not a personality flaw. Identity theft is not a quirky family dynamic. It is a crime. I walked over to the windows of my apartment and looked down at the busy city streets below. The lingering, pathetic sadness of the unloved daughter evaporated completely, burned away by the cold, bright fire of survival. They thought they could use my responsible nature as a weapon against me. They thought I would be too terrified of family conflict to ever challenge a legally binding document. They fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I was a contract director. I spent my days destroying poorly constructed agreements and dismantling people who tried to hide their liabilities in the fine print. They had finally crossed the invisible line between taking me for granted and actively trying to ruin me. And in doing so, they had given me the ultimate gift. They had completely severed my emotional obligations to them. I was no longer an older sister or a dutiful daughter trying to earn her keep. I was a defrauded investor, and it was time to initiate a hostile takeover. The mourning period lasted exactly one night. By the time the sun rose on Monday morning, the crushing weight of betrayal had entirely evaporated, leaving behind a cold, intensely focused clarity. I did not call my mother. I did not reply to the dozen frantic text messages my sister had sent demanding that I fix the payment portal. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I put on my sharpest tailored suit, drove into the city, and began the meticulous process of dismantling the house I had spent my entire adult life trying to save. My first call was to Gavin Mercer. Gavin was a high-stakes commercial litigation attorney operating out of a sleek, uninviting office in downtown Nashville. He was notoriously expensive and famously devoid of bedside manner. He did not offer warm smiles, and he certainly did not pretend to care about the emotional nuances of family drama. He read complex financial contracts the way a forensic pathologist examines a crime scene, peeling back layers of corporate jargon to expose the rotting lies underneath. I sat across from his massive mahogany desk, handed him the printed email from the lending firm, and told him my family had just stolen my financial identity. He did not gasp. He simply pulled a yellow legal pad from his drawer, uncapped his pen, and asked me for the server access logs. I returned to my office at Astor Ridge Planning and enlisted the only person I trusted. Tessa canceled all her afternoon meetings, locked the heavy glass door to my suite, and dragged a massive rolling whiteboard to the center of the room. We spent the next 8 hours building a comprehensive timeline. We were no longer two corporate colleagues gossiping about a bad weekend. We were auditors preparing for a war. Tessa ordered 3 boxes of terrible takeout food, and we stayed until 2 in the morning. We drew a massive black line across the white surface, marking the exact date my mother first mentioned the guest list issues, cross-referencing it with the exact minute the loan application was initiated. We went through old email chains, automated bank notifications, cloud storage synchronization histories, and the shared family digital drive. We mapped out every single time my mother or sister had logged into the portal from the venue office. The metadata told a story that was far more sinister than a simple case of a daughter being left off a guest list. The first major discovery hit like a physical blow. though I was entirely too numb to react to it. Tessa managed to pull the recent business registry filings from the state database. The original, disorganized partnership my parents had run for decades no longer existed. Exactly 90 days prior to the anniversary dinner, they had quietly dissolved the old structure and registered a brand new entity. It was named Willow Creek Events Limited Liability Company. I scanned the operating agreement line by line. My parents were listed as minority members. Brooke was named as the absolute sole managing director, holding full operational control and the largest share of the equity. Then Gavin called with his own preliminary findings regarding the new commercial loan. The massive influx of cash they had secured using my forged signature was not used to rescue the property from any impending bankruptcy. It was not used to pay off the overdue insurance premiums or fix the rotting foundation that I had been desperately funding for years. The itemized disbursement schedule showed exactly where my stolen credit had gone. They had spent tens of thousands of dollars on comprehensive exterior landscaping. They had completely gutted and remodeled the main banquet hall. They had purchased a state-of-the-art outdoor lighting system and erected a brand-new, custom-built teakwood stage. Every single lavish detail I had seen in that deleted social media photograph, the perfectly draped cream-colored linens, the golden taper candles, the fairy lights, had been entirely bankrolled by my unknowing guarantee. They had literally transformed my name into a disposable credit cushion to finance their grand illusion of the perfect, wealthy family. The revelations only grew darker from there. By late Tuesday afternoon, Gavin had dispatched a paralegal to the county clerk office to search for any pending real estate transactions. He found a deed transfer sitting in the holding queue, waiting to be finalized right after the weekend festivities. My parents were actively transferring the physical deed of the estate out of their names and directly into Brooke's possession. The grand anniversary party was never just a celebration of my parents' marriage. It was a carefully orchestrated soft launch. It was a secret coronation ceremony designed to crown my sister as the new, sole heir to the legacy, all while quietly chaining me to the massive debt required to make the kingdom look presentable. But the most calculated cruelty was buried deep in the fine print of the loan agreement itself. Gavin highlighted a specific clause regarding legal notifications and default procedures. If the venue missed a revenue target or failed to make a payment, the lender was required to send formal warning letters, but my family had not listed the estate office as the primary mailing address for those financial warnings. They had listed my apartment in the city. They knew that if the business eventually failed, the process servers and the collection agencies would not knock on the grand wooden doors of Willow Creek House. They would come straight to my lobby. They had built a massive, highly flammable house of cards, and they had legally designated me as the designated firebreak. Hearing this, I felt a strange, profound sense of peace. When someone hurts you accidentally, you agonize over it. When someone methodically plots your financial ruin for their own aesthetic gain, the agonizing stops entirely. You simply go to work. I gave Gavin the authorization to strike. I officially filed a comprehensive fraud complaint with the state regulatory board regarding the unauthorized electronic signature. I had to sit in a sterile room with a public notary and swear under penalty of perjury that I did not authorize the transaction. I handed over my current phone records and my building access logs to prove I was physically sitting in a corporate board meeting at the exact moment the digital signature was stamped from an Internet Protocol address located in Franklin. We submitted an emergency injunction request to freeze all personal liability processing associated with the commercial loan. We did not stop there. Gavin drafted aggressive letters of evidence preservation and sent them via certified mail to Granite Peak Capital, the local notary who had somehow authenticated the fraudulent documents, and the digital signature platform provider. We demanded immediate access to all data used during the signing process. My phone continued to ring endlessly throughout the week. My mother left voicemails that wildly fluctuated between demanding anger and pathetic weeping. Brooke sent paragraphs of manipulative texts accusing me of being petty and trying to ruin their busy spring season out of sheer jealousy. I read every single message, but I did not reply to a single one. I did not take screenshots and post them online to expose their lies. I did not call my aunts and uncles to plead my case or defend my character. I refused to participate in the messy, emotional theater they were so desperately trying to drag me into. I decided right then that the truth of this betrayal would not be communicated through angry shouting matches or tearful confrontations. The truth would walk into the light carried by metadata, access timestamps, and immutable server backups. I was going to let the raw, indisputable data do all the talking. The battlefield had fundamentally shifted. This was no longer a sad story about an older sister who was tragically unloved and kept away from a fancy dinner table. The tears were completely gone, replaced by a terrifying absolute resolve. This was now a brutal procedural war of attrition, and the only question left to answer was who would be legally forced to pay the devastating price of their perfect picture. It had been exactly 4 days of absolute radio silence from my end. I ignored every single phone call and deleted every frantic voicemail without listening to them. On Thursday morning, Brooke finally sent a text message. She did not offer an apology or an explanation for the canceled vendor accounts. She simply dictated a time and a location, demanding that I meet them at a trendy brunch restaurant in downtown Franklin so we could sit down and talk like actual adults. The sheer audacity of her phrasing almost made me laugh in the middle of my office. They had completely stolen my financial identity and mortgaged my future behind my back. Yet they were still desperately trying to frame me as the petulant child throwing an unreasonable tantrum. I agreed to the meeting. I did not agree to negotiate a truce. I was going there to deliver an execution. I arrived at the restaurant 20 minutes early on Friday morning. The establishment was incredibly bright and airy, filled with the loud, cheerful chatter of affluent suburbanites and the sharp clinking of expensive silverware against porcelain plates. It was the exact type of place my mother loved, a place where appearances mattered more than the quality of the food. I requested a quiet corner booth, positioning myself deliberately so I had a clear view of the front entrance. I ordered a simple black coffee and placed a very thin manila folder flat on the edge of the polished wooden table. It contained exactly 1 sheet of paper. I had not brought a massive binder of evidence to argue my case. I had brought 1 single document to observe the precise moment their carefully constructed reality shattered into pieces. My family walked through the heavy glass doors precisely on time, operating seamlessly as a unified front. My mother wore a pristine cream silk blouse, looking completely unbothered and perfectly styled. Brooke was dressed in her usual effortless bohemian chic attire, projecting an aura of slight annoyance. My father trailed a few steps behind them, his shoulders heavily slumped, already looking completely exhausted by a confrontation that had not even officially started. They slid into the leather booth opposite me. The air around our table immediately thickened with a heavy, unspoken tension. My mother took the lead role, exactly as I expected she would. She ordered a sparkling mimosa, gracefully smoothed her linen napkin over her lap, and offered me a smile so densely packed with artificial sweetness that it made my jaw ache. She began speaking in low, soothing tones, expertly adopting the persona of a weary but forgiving peacemaker. She generously conceded that perhaps everyone in the family had acted a little rashly over the busy weekend. She gently suggested that we should absolutely not blow a silly, easily misunderstood social media post completely out of proportion. She attempted to reduce the entire catastrophic situation to a petty sibling squabble over a dinner invitation, completely ignoring the massive financial crater she had secretly dug beneath my feet. Brooke quickly chimed in right on cue, flawlessly playing the role of the grounded, highly practical younger sister. She leaned across the table, her tone dripping with intense condescension. She told me I had a terrible, toxic habit of overthinking every little detail. She accused me of always twisting simple family logistics into some grand personal tragedy just to get attention and ruin the mood. She insisted that the anniversary picture was just a quick, spontaneous snapshot, and that I was intentionally choosing to play the victim to make them feel guilty. It was a classic, highly coordinated manipulation tactic they had used on me for decades. They always attacked my emotional reaction to completely deflect from their own terrible actions. Throughout this opening barrage of gaslighting, my father said absolutely nothing. He sat at the very edge of the booth, both hands wrapped tightly around his warm ceramic coffee mug. He stared intently down at the dark liquid, as if he firmly believed that by simply refusing to make eye contact with me, the horrifying reality of what he had allowed his wife and youngest daughter to do would somehow not touch him. His cowardly silence in that moment was just as loud and just as violent as their spoken lies. I sat perfectly still. I let them talk. I let them spin their delicate, intricate webs of plausible deniability for 15 solid minutes. I did not interrupt them. I did not defend my hurt feelings. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. When Brooke finally paused to take a breath and take a sip of her water, I reached out and slowly opened the thin manila folder. I slid the single sheet of paper across the table, stopping it right in front of my mother. It was not a printed copy of the deleted social media post. It was the official digital forensic confirmation from the commercial lender. It clearly detailed the exact electronic signature, the precise processing timeline, and the specific internet protocol address used to forge my name on the massive loan portfolio. Brooke looked down at the paper. Her eyes quickly scanned the bolded data lines. She reacted far too quickly, her mouth moving before her brain could catch up to the danger. The confident, condescending smirk completely vanished from her beautiful face, replaced instantly by a sudden, panicked, defensive flare. She blurted out loudly that I always knew Willow Creek House had to stay in the family no matter what. It was a fatal, irreversible slip of the tongue. We had never once discussed any legal ownership transfer. The loan document sitting on the table did not mention the property deed at all. Her panicked statement instantly proved to me that she was not just a passive, ignorant beneficiary of my mother's financial fraud. She was fully aware of the secret succession plan. She knew the entire time that I was buying her a venue I would never be allowed to own. My mother realized the catastrophic error the second the words left Brooke's mouth. Diane panicked, her perfect composure shattering in real time, in a desperate, incredibly clumsy attempt to walk back her daughter's damning admission. She leaned forward and hissed across the table. Her voice completely dropped its sweet maternal cadence and became harsh and urgent. She told me to lower my voice and stop causing a public scene, despite the fact that I had not spoken a single word since they arrived. Then, she delivered the final blow. She frantically explained that they did not mean to hurt me, claiming they only needed to use my name for a little while just to get the application through the strict underwriting process. A heavy, suffocating silence instantly crashed down over our corner of the restaurant. The cheerful clattering of dishes and the loud conversations from the surrounding tables seemed to completely fade away into a dull, distant hum. I did not need my lawyer to depose her under oath. I did not need a judge to compel her testimony in a courtroom. She had just handed me a full, uncoerced confession right over a basket of warm pastries. She had openly admitted that the forged digital signature was not a clerical error or a desperate misunderstanding. It was a highly calculated, intentional strategy designed to exploit my credit history. I felt absolutely no anger in that moment. I felt no residual sorrow for the family I was officially losing, because the family I had spent my entire life mourning had never actually existed in the first place. I slowly stood up from the leather booth. I reached into my purse, pulled out a $20 bill, and placed it exactly in the center of the wooden table to cover the coffee I had barely touched. I looked down at the three people sitting there, stripped completely bare of their beautiful, wealthy facade. I kept my voice incredibly soft, perfectly even, and terrifyingly cold. I told them that if Willow Creek was truly their family, then they needed to keep it entirely in their own name. I did not wait for their response. I turned around and walked straight out of the bright restaurant, stepping into the warm morning sun, leaving them to sit in the chilling reality of their own total destruction. By Monday morning, the legal gears Gavin Mercer had set into motion began to grind the estate down to dust. Gavin did not send a polite inquiry to the commercial lender. He formally served Granite Peak Capital with a verified notice of contested liability and a demand for an immediate fraud investigation. Corporate financial institutions do not possess a sense of loyalty. The moment their risk assessment algorithms flagged the massive loan portfolio as potentially fraudulent, they acted with ruthless efficiency. Within 48 hours of our brunch meeting, the lender completely froze the revolving line of credit. For a business that operated entirely on the illusion of liquid wealth, a frozen credit line was an immediate, catastrophic death sentence. The invisible shockwaves hit the local event industry almost instantly. Vendors who were accustomed to receiving prompt, quiet direct deposits from my personal checking account suddenly found their invoices bouncing. The boutique floral arrangers, the specialty linen rental companies, and the high-end catering staff began talking. In the tight-knit, highly gossipy world of Southern wedding planning, an unpaid invoice is never a secret for long. Rumors began to crawl out of the venue accounting room and spread across town like a quiet, invisible fire. People started whispering that Willow Creek House was insolvent. Brooke reacted exactly the way a cornered, deeply insecure person always reacts. She immediately took to the internet to perform her favorite role as the tragic victim. She began posting a steady stream of vague, highly emotional paragraphs on her social media pages. She complained bitterly about how heartbreaking it was when your own blood tries to destroy your family business out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. She posted dramatically lit selfies looking exhausted and stressed, claiming she was working day and night to protect her parents' legacy from an insider who wanted to see them fail. I saw the posts, forwarded to me by a few concerned acquaintances, but I did absolutely nothing. I did not draft a single counter-argument. I did not post the forensic audit reports in the comments. I maintained an absolute, suffocating silence. In the modern era of constant digital screaming, refusing to engage is the most terrifying tactic you can employ. My complete lack of retaliation made Brooke look incredibly desperate. Without me actively fighting back, her dramatic narratives had nothing to push against. She was just swinging wildly at empty air, and her followers slowly began to realize that her story smelled completely staged and hollow. Then, an unexpected ally emerged from the very center of their collapsing house. On Wednesday afternoon, Gavin received a highly confidential email from Lena Ortiz. Lena was the quiet, severely underpaid internal bookkeeper who had worked in the cramped back office of the estate for over 5 years. She was a meticulous woman who kept her head down, but she possessed a strong moral compass and an intense dislike for my mother. Lena secretly forwarded Gavin a long, damning chain of internal emails dating back to the week the loan was finalized. In those messages, my mother had explicitly ordered Lena to intercept all physical mail coming from Granite Peak Capital. Diane had written, in her own words, that the bank statements needed to be secured in her personal desk drawer so that I would not see them early and get confused about the corporate restructuring. It was the ultimate smoking gun. It completely destroyed any lingering defense that the forged signature was an accidental administrative overlap. Diane had actively, maliciously plotted to keep me completely in the dark while she drained my credit. Lena did not just stop at the email chain. She also casually mentioned a crucial detail about the catering manifest for the infamous anniversary dinner. The party had never been a small, intimate gathering of close relatives. The guest list included 3 regional event investors, several high-net-worth corporate partners, and a man named Reed Callahan. Reed was a wealthy, somewhat naive real estate developer who had recently become Brooke's new fiancé. My mother had thrown that lavish party specifically to impress Reed and his deep pockets, desperately trying to prove that Brooke was inheriting a thriving, debt-free luxury empire. The excuse that they simply lacked the physical space for me at the table was a complete, verifiable lie. They needed me gone because my presence as the actual financial backbone of the property would have ruined the wealthy heiress narrative Brooke was selling to her future husband. The walls began closing in on them from every possible angle. Following Gavin's aggressive preservation letters, Granite Peak Capital escalated their internal fraud protocols. They sent a formal demand to the newly formed limited liability company, requiring Brooke, as the sole managing director, to submit to a deep, biometric identity verification process to clear the flagged digital signatures. Brooke completely panicked. She knew that the network access logs the bank possessed showed that dozens of administrative logins and document authentications had originated directly from the wireless internet router sitting inside my parents' living room. She could not blame a random hacker. The digital footprints led straight from the forged loan documents to her own personal laptop. The mounting legal pressure finally shattered the romantic illusion she had so carefully built for Reed Callahan. Reed was a businessman. He understood the lethal implications of frozen credit lines, skipped vendor payments, and formal fraud investigations. He had originally been told that the James family was simply undergoing a smart, strategic asset restructuring to optimize their taxes. When he realized that his beautiful bride-to-be was actually the primary target of a massive federal identity theft dispute, he started asking very sharp, unforgiving questions. He realized he was not marrying into a historic Southern legacy. He was marrying into a ticking legal bomb that threatened to completely decimate his own financial standing. The stress of the impending collapse turned the grand estate into a toxic, unlivable war zone. My parents' perfectly curated marriage rapidly disintegrated under the crushing weight of their incoming ruin. Diane spent her days frantically trying to secure predatory, high-interest bridge loans to pay off the furious vendors, while blaming Brooke for being too careless with the digital passwords. Brooke screamed right back, accusing her mother of orchestrating the entire illegal scheme and forcing her to take the operational fall. Their vicious, echoing arguments dragged on deep into the night, shattering the peaceful, aristocratic silence of the property. My father, entirely true to his weak and cowardly nature, completely abandoned his wife and daughter in their hour of crisis. He could not handle the constant screaming or the terrifying reality of the legal notices piling up on the mahogany entryway table. Martin quietly packed a small canvas duffel bag and moved out of the main house. He started sleeping on a worn-out leather sofa in the dusty, uninsulated storage office located behind the main event barn, physically hiding from the consequences he had passively allowed to happen. As for me, I remained in my quiet city apartment, functioning with a level of cold efficiency I had never experienced before. For the very first time in my entire 34 years of life, I did not rush in to absorb their pain. I did not wire them $5,000 to stop the florist from suing them. I did not call my mother to offer a soft, sympathetic ear while she cried about her ruined reputation. I stood completely still and watched the fire spread. I had spent decades exhausting my own spirit to act as their human shield, constantly placing myself between their careless actions and the harsh reality of the world. I had foolishly believed that saving them was my fundamental duty as a daughter, but the forged signature and the cream-colored dinner party had permanently cured me of that delusion. I finally understood that true peace does not come from endlessly fixing the mistakes of people who do not love you. True peace comes from stepping completely out of the way. I simply lowered my hands, stepped off the battlefield, and allowed the heavy, devastating consequences of their own actions to finally find the right people. The county clerk office officially halted the deed transfer on a Tuesday morning. Gavin had filed a formal notice of contested asset with the local government, completely paralyzing my parents' grand succession plan. Willow Creek House could not be gifted, sold, or leveraged. It was officially trapped in a heavy legal purgatory. Simultaneously, the financial vice began to tighten from the outside. Granite Peak Capital was not a patient institution. When the rumors of our vicious legal battle bled into the tight-knit Nashville wedding planning community, the devastating impact was immediate. Prospective brides are incredibly risk-averse. Absolutely no one wants to book a luxury venue that might be seized by a commercial bank a week before their wedding day. Future bookings plummeted instantly. The venue missed its projected revenue targets for the first quarter by over 60%. The lender immediately escalated their collection threats, demanding massive cash injections to keep the accounts out of default. The intense pressure cooker finally forced my mother to break her angry silence. She called me late on a Thursday evening. I answered the phone only because I knew Gavin needed more rope to hang them with. Her voice was a theatrical masterpiece of manufactured despair. She was sobbing loudly, her breath catching perfectly between words, pleading with me to remember the good times we shared when I was a little girl. She spun a tragic, elaborate tale about how the legal stress was physically destroying my father. Then, right on cue, she slipped in the poison pill. She gently suggested that her lawyers had drafted a simple set of procedural cleanup papers. She claimed it was just standard administrative housekeeping to clear up the silly confusion with the bank and get the innocent vendors paid before the lucrative spring wedding season collapsed entirely. She begged me to just sign the electronic document she had emailed, promising that once the busy season was over, they would make everything right and finally pay me back for all my help over the past few years. I did not argue with her. I kept my voice perfectly flat, told her I would review the attachment, and hung up the phone. The next morning, I sat in Gavin Mercer's office and watched him read the 50-page document. He did not smile often, but when he reached the third page, a short, dark laugh escaped his lips. He tossed the thick stack of paper onto his mahogany desk. He looked at me and explained that the document was absolutely not a procedural cleanup. It was a retroactive ratification agreement. By signing it, I would be legally acknowledging that I was fully aware of the original loan and retroactively consenting to be the primary guarantor. But the trap was even more vicious than that. Buried deep in the dense legal jargon on page 30 was a specific clause quietly making me personally responsible for tens of thousands of dollars in backdated corporate sales taxes that the venue had completely failed to remit to the state over the past 3 years. My mother was not asking for a family truce. She was asking me to step directly into a massive federal tax trap simply to shield her own business from a government audit. That realization severed the very last, microscopic thread of familial loyalty holding my heart together. They still did not see me as a daughter. They did not see me as a human being who was bleeding out from their betrayal. In their frantic, desperate minds, I was still just a utility. I was the final missing signature required to keep their crumbling stage from collapsing into the dirt. They were completely willing to send me to federal prison for tax evasion just so they could keep hosting high society parties under their beautiful fairy lights. When I completely ignored the email containing the trap, Brooke immediately pivoted to a different strategy. The sweet, weeping manipulation from my mother was instantly replaced by pure, unadulterated venom from my sister. Brooke sent a long, blistering text message to my personal phone. She dropped the innocent victim act completely and resorted to outright extortion. She threatened that if I did not sign the settlement papers and permanently drop the fraud investigation, she would spend the rest of her life making sure the entire town knew what a terrible monster I was. She promised to tell everyone in our extended social circle that I was a bitter, deeply unstable woman who was intentionally destroying her elderly parents' financial security simply because I was too jealous to handle being left off a single dinner party guest list. She genuinely wanted me to believe that the local court of public opinion would ruin my professional reputation before the actual civil courts could rule on the identity theft. I was still reading her pathetic, desperate threats when the most surprising and devastating piece of evidence arrived in my inbox. The sender was not my mother, my angry sister, or the aggressive commercial lender. It was my father. Martin had always been a silent ghost in our family dynamics. He spent his entire life avoiding conflict at all costs, quietly hiding in the shadows while the women in his house tore each other apart. But self-preservation is a remarkably powerful motivator. He sent me a forwarded chain of highly incriminating internal email drafts retrieved directly from the venue office server. The messages were exchanged between Brooke and my mother exactly 2 weeks before the massive loan was finalized. The drafts were a revelation of pure malice. They clearly showed Brooke providing step-by-step technical instructions to Diane. Brooke was the one who extensively researched how to bypass the security authentication on my shared cloud drive. Brooke was the one who typed out the exact sequence for copying my old digital signature file and pasting it onto the new financial application documents without triggering the automated security alerts. She had meticulously, intentionally coached our mother through the entire technical execution of the identity theft. My father did not send this critical evidence to me because he suddenly grew a conscience or deeply wanted to protect his eldest daughter. He did not include a heartfelt apology or a tearful explanation for his years of cowardly silence. He sent it because the walls were completely caving in. He knew the federal authorities were likely going to be involved very soon, and he wanted to make absolutely sure the undeniable paper trail pointed entirely at his wife and his youngest daughter. He was actively watching his legacy go down in flames, and instead of grabbing a bucket of water to help, he chose to throw his favorite golden child overboard just to lighten the load and save himself. His silent betrayal of Brooke was just as cold, calculated, and ruthless as their betrayal of me. I sat alone in my quiet apartment, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. I meticulously downloaded the damning email chain, carefully saved Brooke's threatening text messages, and added the fraudulent tax cleanup documents to the massive, encrypted file I shared with Gavin. There was absolutely no sadness left in my body. There was no lingering, pathetic desire to drive out to the estate, confront them in their grand foyer, and demand a screaming explanation. There was absolutely zero hope for any kind of family reconciliation. I was entirely done with the exhausting emotional chaos that had defined my entire existence. My only remaining objective was perfectly clear and incredibly sharp. I was going to walk out of this burning building without carrying a single dollar of their dirty debt. I was going to make sure my name was completely scrubbed from their financial ruin, and I was going to make sure the law recognized exactly who had forged the documents. As I locked the digital files away and closed my computer, I knew exactly how this war was going to end. The final fatal blow would not be delivered in a dramatic shouting match. It would not be driven by blind rage or tearful, messy revenge. It would be something infinitely colder, heavier, and much more permanent. The absolute destruction of their perfect family illusion would simply be the undisputed truth, presented in the exact chronological order, inside a quiet legal room where absolutely no one could hide behind a beautiful lie anymore. By the middle of the following week, the carefully constructed walls around my parents' false empire began to crack visibly in the public eye. A prominent local business blog that extensively covered the Nashville hospitality and events sector published a short, vaguely worded article. It reported that Willow Creek House was abruptly postponing several high-profile spring events due to unforeseen internal financial issues. In the tight-knit, heavily gossiped world of Southern weddings, those specific words were the exact equivalent of a loud, undeniable death knell. My mother responded to the mounting public humiliation exactly as I expected. She spent her afternoons drinking overly sweet iced tea with her wealthy country club friends, crying softly into expensive linen napkins, and lamenting how her eldest daughter had suddenly turned completely heartless. She spun a tragic, elaborate narrative of an ungrateful child trying to ruin her aging parents out of pure, unreasonable spite. Meanwhile, my sister took a much quieter, far more cowardly approach. Brooke began systematically purging her social media accounts. The glamorous, perfectly filtered images of her luxurious life slowly disappeared. The picture of the cream and white anniversary dinner was long gone, but now she was also erasing the photos of her wearing expensive designer clothes on the estate grounds, the pictures of the new floral arrangements, and the carefully staged shots of her sipping wine on the wrap around porch. She was frantically trying to scrub the digital proof of the wealth she had stolen before the civil authorities could officially catalog it. I sat in Gavin Mercer's office on a rainy Thursday afternoon, completely untouched by my mother's tears or my sister's digital retreat. Gavin closed a thick, heavy black binder on his desk and folded his hands. He looked at me and confirmed that our legal arsenal was finally complete. The file was terrifyingly heavy and completely bulletproof. We had the original server access logs, proving exactly where the fraudulent digital signatures originated. We had the revised operating agreement for the new limited liability company, naming my sister as the sole managing director. We had the damning internal emails from the venue accountant proving my mother deliberately hid the financial statements from me. We had the drafted electronic messages my father had cowardly leaked, showing Brooke explicitly coaching my mother through the identity theft. And anchoring it all was the precise, undeniable metadata timeline of the anniversary picture being posted at the exact moment the final loan documents were being fraudulently authenticated. The case was completely airtight. When I left his office, I did not drive straight back to my city apartment. I drove out toward Franklin. It was late in the afternoon, the sky bruised with heavy gray clouds. When I finally pulled onto the narrow shoulder of the two-lane highway directly across from the estate, I did not turn the engine off. I did not step out of the car. I simply rolled down the window and stared across the wet asphalt at the grand, sweeping property. I looked at the massive weeping willows swaying gently in the wind. I looked at the long, distressed brick pathways leading up to the main house. I remembered being 22 years old, spending my entire summer weekends pushing a heavy lawnmower across those expansive lawns in the sweltering southern heat, because my parents could not afford a professional landscaping crew. I remembered standing precariously on a tall metal ladder, my fingers bleeding, hanging those heavy string lights from the old oak branches right before their very first wedding season officially opened. I remembered spending countless hours scrubbing the dusty storage sheds, organizing the inventory, and pouring every ounce of my youthful energy into making sure that place succeeded. Sitting there in the quiet hum of my car, the deepest, most agonizing realization finally settled into my chest. The true pain of the past month had never really been about finding out I was excluded from a fancy dinner table. The true heartbreak was recognizing that I had spent my entire adult life believing I was helping to build a shared home. I had desperately believed that every dollar I wired, every hour I worked, and every sacrifice I made was securing my place in a family legacy. But as I looked at the beautiful, imposing structure across the road, I finally understood the cold reality. They never saw me as a builder. They never saw me as a daughter returning home. To them, I had always been nothing more than human collateral. I was merely an asset they could leverage whenever the roof started leaking or the commercial bank came calling. I rolled up the window, put the car in drive, and drove away from Willow Creek House for the very last time without shedding a single tear. The final desperate attempts to stop the impending legal explosion arrived that evening. The first attempt came directly from Granite Peak Capital. They reached out to Gavin with a private, highly confidential settlement offer. Corporate lenders absolutely despise bad press and messy, prolonged public fraud trials. The bank proposed a quiet compromise. If I agreed to drop the identity theft investigation and sign a strict non-disclosure agreement, they would allow me to assume only 20% of the massive debt, forgiving the rest of my alleged personal liability and pursuing the limited liability company for the balance. They framed it as a generous favor, a convenient way for me to quickly escape a grueling legal war. I rejected the offer immediately. I instructed Gavin to tell them I would not accept a discounted cage. I did not want a smaller portion of a fraudulent loan. I wanted my name completely sterilized from their corrupt ledger. I wanted the absolute, unvarnished truth on the public record. The second attempt came later that night, glowing brightly on my phone screen in the quiet darkness of my living room. It was a long text message from Brooke. She had completely abandoned her previous threats of social ruin. The tone was completely pathetic, dripping with a desperate, bargaining pleading. She promised that if I just accepted the bank settlement and saved the venue from going into public receivership, our parents would be so incredibly grateful. Then, she offered her ultimate prize. She promised that once the dust settled, we would hire a professional photographer and take a proper, beautiful family picture on the front lawn. She swore she would make sure I was standing right in the center, next to our mother, so everyone would know I belonged. I stared at the glowing text message, and for the first time in over a month, a genuine, loud laugh escaped my throat. The sound echoed strangely in the empty apartment. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated disbelief. After the forged signatures, the stolen credit, the lies, and the unbelievable emotional abuse, my sister still genuinely believed that my highest aspiration in life was to be included in one of her fake, curated photographs. She fundamentally thought I was the one who was obsessed with the aesthetic. It was the ultimate proof that she had absolutely no idea who I was. I never cared about the picture. I only cared about the truth. I deleted the message without typing a single word in response. I was just turning off the bedside lamp, preparing to finally go to sleep, when one last email notification chimed from my phone. It was from Gavin. His paralegal team had been digging through the county probate records during the asset discovery phase and had stumbled upon a newly registered document. I opened the attachment. It was an amended version of my parents' last will and testament, quietly updated and notarized just 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner. I read through the dense legal paragraphs, my eyes scanning the distribution of assets. The estate, the business equity, and the liquid accounts were entirely routed to Brooke. I was almost completely written out of any financial inheritance. But it was the specific wording in the final paragraph that froze the blood in my veins. My parents had included a highly specific, completely unenforceable clause regarding my existence. The document explicitly stated that while I was not receiving any ownership stake in Willow Creek House, I was still expected to maintain a lifelong moral responsibility to financially assist the family estate in times of severe hardship. They had legally codified my servitude. They had gone to a lawyer and officially documented their belief that I was not entitled to their wealth, but I was permanently chained to their failures. They wanted to ensure that even from beyond the grave, they could still reach into my pockets to fund my sister's perfect life. That single, terrifying paragraph was the final gift they ever gave me. It was the absolute, undeniable proof that there was nothing left to save and absolutely nothing left to mourn. It completely eradicated any lingering, microscopic fraction of hesitation hiding in the back of my mind. I locked my phone, set it on the nightstand, and laid my head back against the pillow. I fell into a deep, incredibly peaceful sleep, knowing with absolute certainty that when the sun rose on the morning of the legal hearings, I was going to burn their beautiful rotting house entirely to the ground. The mandatory pre-litigation mediation took place on a heavy, overcast Tuesday morning inside a remarkably small, aggressively sterile conference room at the Williamson County Courthouse. I arrived early with Gavin Mercer. When my family finally walked through the heavy wooden door, their strategy was immediately obvious. They had dressed in soft, muted colors, completely abandoning their usual sharp, wealthy aesthetics. They walked in with slumped shoulders and trembling hands, clearly hoping that the sheer physical sight of my aging parents sitting across a narrow table would force my lifelong habit of submission to kick in. They were desperately waiting for me to soften, to cry, and to ultimately surrender. I did not even blink. Gavin did not open the session with an impassioned plea or an emotional summary of my suffering. He opened it with cold, chronological certainty. He spread a massive, meticulously organized binder across the polished table. One by one, he laid out the undeniable architecture of their crime. He presented the initial loan application files, the precise cloud storage access logs, the amended corporate charter for the new limited liability company, the internal emails demanding that my mail be intercepted, and the devastating electronic drafts my father had leaked showing the exact step-by-step orchestration of the forgery. But the absolute largest, most shattering blow did not come from a complex financial ledger. It came when Gavin reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of glossy photo paper. He placed the high-resolution printout of Brooke's deleted anniversary photograph squarely in the center of the table. Right next to it, he placed the final digital signature authentication log from Granite Peak Capital. He drew a line between the two documents with his silver pen. He pointed out the horrifying, undeniable truth. During the exact hour they were all sitting under those expensive fairy lights, raising their crystal champagne glasses, and proudly posting that they were finally together with family only. The final electronic transfers locking the massive commercial debt securely to my stolen identity were being processed on my sister's phone beneath the table. The photograph was not just a social slight, it was a digital timestamp of their active fraud. Brooke stared at the picture, her face draining of all color. In a frantic, pathetic attempt to save herself, she tried to argue that because I had voluntarily shared my personal identification documents with the family for the insurance claim 4 years ago, the boundaries of authorization had simply become naturally blurred. She actually tried to claim it was a continuous, implied consent. Gavin shut her down with a voice like cracking ice. He flatly stated that retaining old digital access to a shared folder is absolutely not a legal license to commit federal identity theft for a brand new commercial loan. Seeing her golden child failing, Diane attempted to desperately pivot back to her role as the wounded, well-meaning matriarch. She pressed a tissue to her eyes and cried that she only ever wanted to protect the property for all of us, claiming she just made a terrible administrative mistake under severe stress. But Gavin systematically destroyed her maternal performance. He laid down the handwritten note she had used to reject my restored photo album. He laid down the aggressive text message warning me not to make a fuss. Finally, he presented the fraudulent tax cleanup document she had tried to trick me into signing just days prior. He explained to the mediator that these were not the actions of a confused, loving mother. They formed a clear, malicious chain of behavior, proving a deliberate, sustained intent to exclude me entirely from the benefits of the estate, while securely locking me inside the financial obligations. The beautiful, cohesive family facade completely shattered right then and there. When Brooke finally processed the reality of Gavin's presentation, she realized that Granite Peak Capital was officially pivoting their legal crosshairs. The bank was no longer targeting my corporate salary. They were shifting the full weight of the massive liability directly onto the people who had actually submitted the fraudulent application. Her self-preservation instincts violently overrode her familial loyalty. Brooke physically turned in her chair and began screaming at our mother right in the middle of the quiet conference room. She accused Diane of forcing her to execute the plan, sobbing that she was just following her mother's terrible advice. Diane screamed back, calling Brooke an ungrateful, careless child. The polished, aristocratic James family completely dissolved into a vicious, terrifying display of pure survival, tearing each other apart to avoid the incoming ruin. The preliminary legal outcome was swift, absolute, and utterly devastating for them. The mediator and the bank representatives agreed to an immediate injunction. My fraudulent guarantor obligations were officially and permanently voided. I was completely severed from their financial sinking ship. The bank immediately converted the dispute into a massive civil lawsuit aimed directly at Willow Creek events, Diane, Martin, and Brooke. Furthermore, the county registrar permanently blocked the deed transfer. The grand estate could not be gifted to my sister. In order to recover the massive principal debt, the accumulated interest, and the severe penalty fees, the commercial lender forced the venue into immediate financial receivership. A court-appointed monitor was dispatched to take over all operations and seize all incoming revenue. The most likely outcome, which the bank representative confirmed with cold indifference, was that the property would be placed into a forced foreclosure sale by the end of the year. The grand ancestral legacy they had committed federal fraud to secure for Brooke was ultimately going to be ripped away from all of them. But the absolute final victory belonged to Gavin. He did not just secure my release from the bad debt. He successfully demanded that the family estate be held entirely liable for my extensive legal fees. Even more devastatingly, he secured a legally binding agreement for the full reimbursement of every single dollar I had personally paid into the venue's maintenance, software subscriptions, and insurance premiums during the entire period they were actively defrauding me. The game had fundamentally changed. I was no longer running from a fraudulent debt. They were now legally forced to face the full, unmitigated bill of their own luxurious existence. When the session finally concluded and the paperwork was stamped, the room emptied quickly. Gavin stepped out into the hallway to speak with the bank representatives. I remained at the table for a brief moment, quietly zipping my leather briefcase. My mother lingered near the heavy wooden door. She looked entirely broken. The perfect posture, the arrogant tilt of her chin, and the condescending warmth were entirely gone. She looked like a hollow, terrified old woman. She stared at me, her eyes red and swimming with fresh, genuine tears, and whispered that I was cruel. She said I had completely destroyed our family. I stopped packing my bag. I stood up, looked her directly in the eyes, and felt an incredible, weightless sense of freedom. My voice was perfectly calm, devoid of any anger or sorrow. "No," I replied. "I just stopped paying for everyone to continue pretending." I turned around and walked out of the sterile conference room. the heavy wooden door clicking firmly shut behind me. I walked out into the bright, clear afternoon air, leaving my entire past behind me, and resting quietly on the polished conference table, left behind with the wreckage of their lives, was the printed photograph of their perfect anniversary dinner. The picture they had used to proudly erase my name was now officially nothing more than a permanent piece of criminal evidence in a closed legal file. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Where are you listening from right now? Please drop a comment below to share your location and let us know your thoughts on how this family drama unfolded. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.